You're watching public access programming on Urbana Public Television.
Good afternoon and welcome again to Community Planning Conversations. Today, Brad Uken is joining me to talk about the issue of farmland within our county. Brad is the manager of the Champaign County Farm Bureau. But before I turn to Brad, I wanted to let you all know about an upcoming educational opportunity, especially since we are so involved in big, small, all here within Champaign County. The Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the university annually sponsors a planning institute. And here it is. Here's the Planning Institute, and it is scheduled for the 2nd and 3rd of March on campus at the Levis Center. And as you can see, the topic this year is practical planning. I'm going to turn over the cards so you can see a little bit more of the information about it. A couple of people that I wanted to highlight for you to be thinking about attending those evening talks is Michael Piatek, who is a nationally known architect, especially for good design for affordable housing. And our other featured speaker is Gary Hack. And Gary is the Dean of the School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. And the interesting project that Gary is working on right now is some of the housing problems as a result of the Gulf disaster. And I am hoping that that is going to be a large amount of his talk. If you're interested in finding out any more details about the Institute, the website is www.urban.uiuc.edu/CE. And we'll put this card on the screen again at the end of our conversation. Brad, welcome, and thank you so much for coming today and talking about farmland and the preservation of farmland. And I really would like to kick our conversation off with you talking about why is it just so important for us to preserve our farmland due to where we are geographically. People in the county probably appreciate the value of our farmland from the sense of calling it black gold, but they may not appreciate just how valuable it is globally.
Well, and that's a great place to start, Patsy. And first of all, thanks for having me on the program.
My pleasure.
Basically, we have some of the richest and best soils in the world, not just the United States, not just the state of Illinois. We have some of the best soils here in East Central Illinois in the world, and we're one of the top 3 areas for production. And so they're not making more soil each day. I mean, there is more soil being created, but they're not making more farmland. And so as expansion occurs, we have to, I think, keep that at least in the back of our minds that we're doing away with some of the best farmland in the world that we have here in East Central Illinois.
Can you mention the 2 other places in the world that are identified?
You know, I didn't know this was going to be a test today, Patsy, but I really can't. I assume there's a patch in South America probably is from some very fertile soil, and honestly, I couldn't answer the other one.
The reason I brought this up is that fine program that I attended this past summer that the Farm Bureau sponsored, and one of the key pieces of information I came away from was exactly what you just explained, and my memory was there is an area in Russia which absolutely surprised me. I would not have thought about that, but it certainly raised for me the significance of the value, and I don't just mean monetary value, the value of our farmland, and that we need to discuss and think about even more how we can make certain it isn't getting covered up, which leads me into my next point to ask you about is just roughly give us some idea of the losses and if there have been any gains in farmland here within our state, or even broader in this breadbasket, the Midwest?
Well, I think, Patsy, where many of us are familiar, where you're just in Champaign, Urbana, or traveling wherever you may travel to, we can always see new developments occurring. Champaign is expanding, Urbana is expanding, Bloomington, Normal, Peoria. I mean, you name it. There's expansion occurring throughout the Midwest of cities are growing. As far as more farmland, really there's not. As I said, they're not making more farmland each year, but there has been in the past several years some interesting statistics that may have thrown some people off on that. A couple years ago, there was a statistic that came out from the USDA, I believe it was, who said Champaign County actually got more farmland, and there was more farmland in Champaign County than thought from past surveys. And
But
so,
you just told me we can't get more
well,
land.
and that's a unique answer. What if I recall right, what happened in that is that there are always land put into conservation type programs, and so some of that ground is not calculated as farmland because it's in a conservation program, and that means a conservation may be a wetlands project, it may be a buffer along some streams, a grassed waterway, things like that, or a field border. Some of those programs obviously expired through the federal government, and at that point, the farmer or the landowner has the opportunity to re-enroll or to take it out of that program. And in some cases, the land was taken out and put back into tillable land. Well, then that did make the number look like we did grow in farmland, but we, in essence, did not take over part of Vermilion County or anything. It was more or less farmland coming back into production that had been in conservation. And you have to keep in mind some of that ground was not the most desirable. Some of that ground was gently rolling or rolling, and some of the soil types were not the greatest. And so, but again, farmers in general are concerned about the environment. They're concerned about conservation, and so majority of that ground is re-enrolled. But there's always, for a variety of reasons, ground not re-enrolled in some of those federally funded programs. So that's how at times it can look like Champaign County or other counties are gaining farmland when in reality they're not creating more. It's just the definition of it.
I'm certain that people appreciate that understanding. It helped me tremendously. What are we doing here in Champaign County to preserve our farmland?
Preserving farmland is a very difficult question at times to answer in what you're doing, because it's a very fine line between preserving farmland, which is again a short commodity that's not growing, and private property rights. There's that argument that I should be able to do with my property whatever I want to, and to an extent that's absolutely correct. The other side, and there's another side of this story, is that, well, we should be preserving it because, again, we're not making more farmland. What are we doing here? Well, the county's going through a zoning ordinance that would perhaps limit some development out in the county. And then there's other policies that are being proposed. The Farm Bureau has a couple policies that would look at preserving farmland, or not necessarily slow or stunt growth, but more in a controlled fashion. The Champaign County Farm Bureau, one of their main policies is they want compact and contiguous development with an emphasis on infill redevelopment.
Okay.
So you look at Bloomington Normal, for an example, stepping away from the county. Bloomington Normal has grown from its center out. You haven't seen subdivisions 20 miles north of town in the middle of farmland.
No leapfrog.
Right, no leapfrog. They have slowly grown out. And the Farm Bureau realizes that we probably can't completely stop development from occurring, and that's not one of our goals, but we can plan for development because there can be a balance between farmland and development and housing. We think that there is an equilibrium there.
You mentioned Bloomington Normal, so we're in McLean County
Yes,
with
in McLean County,
with
correct.
that conversation. What is different in McLean County as compared to Champaign County that they seem to be able to curtail the leapfrogging, whereas we are, the last statistic I heard, covering land 4 to 5-fold in relationship to the increase in our population in the county.
And I've heard that statistic as well, and Patsy, that's just amazing to me. And I wonder who's building these houses. And you know, I've talked to various individuals, and they've said, you know, people are wanting bigger lots, bigger houses. Unfortunately, there's some divorces that occur. Well, then you have each individual wanting a house, and so the next thing you know, you go from one house to a second house, and there's a single individual living in some of those. And so, you're correct. I've heard those statistics as well. As far as what Bloomington Normal is doing differently than what Champaign-Urbana or the county is doing, you know, I hate to say that they're necessarily planning better or work. This is a higher priority. I'd hate to say that because I know it is a priority here in Champaign County, and so I don't have a great answer. You know, I know that Champaign and the Urbana and the county's concerned about this, and they're trying to do some things. So, you know, I really don't have a great answer for what makes us different from Bloomington Normal and how they're able to control some of their growth and plan for it. So I don't have that answer. But, you know, one of the things that Farm Bureau also believes in is infill redevelopment. And so that's something that a lot of people may not be familiar with. But what that is, as an example, there's empty buildings. A Best Buy or the Walmart on Prospect Avenue closed, and they went on North Prospect and built another building. Our concern is, and again, I know Champaign has some incentives, and I'm not familiar 100% with Urbana, but that they should be emphasizing that businesses that want to come to our community look at those properties and redevelop those, whether that's using the existing building or tearing it down. The cities and them should be encouraging redevelopment of those properties instead of allowing a new business that wants to come to town to just build next to Walmart, the new Walmart on North Prospect. And I use Walmart as the first one that comes to mind. I mean, there's numerous businesses that have relocated and their old properties are sitting empty. And we believe that infill redevelopment needs to continue to be a priority. And again, I know that there are some incentives for various communities, and so it's something that needs to be continued and more emphasis put on that.
Well, you highlight that there are now 3 empty big boxes in Champaign along the freeway and then up toward North Prospect. And when Best Buy moved to the North Prospect position, they actually did not change their footprint. In other words, they did not build a larger store. All they wanted to do was be in that visible street place. It's so interesting that you mentioned North Prospect. I did spend the early part of this afternoon in training to be a facilitator for this next stage of Big Small All. And as we were practicing through what we will be doing tomorrow morning at the Holiday Inn, it was, what are some of the weak spots within the county? That's the better way to phrase it. And what leapt forward was North Prospect. So I found it fascinating that people were identifying North Prospect as a very serious problem from being ugly, traffic, not walkable, from many aspects of it, yet North Prospect keeps growing north, shall we say.
And I should say, too, there are challenges with infill redevelopment. One of them is there's a cost. I believe I've been told there's additional cost because not every business is going to want that size of building or they want the building changed, and there's additional cost to that. And again, I think that's where incentives can come in and help them redo that building. A couple years ago, I read an interesting article. It was in the USA Today, and I really wish I had clipped it out. But one of those, I didn't have the scissors with me. I was in a restaurant, so I couldn't. But
and you couldn't walk out with.
And I couldn't walk out with it. But it was in the USA Today, and it talked about how in California, the agriculture community has teamed up with the labor unions to encourage redevelopment because agriculture saw the disappearing farmland by the new development, and the labor unions liked it because there was some additional cost and they got more money and got more work out of it because often the buildings would need to be tore down or completely remodeled, and so they saw it as job stability if there was more redevelopment of these old buildings. And so it was interesting, an uncommon union was formed, at least out there, with agriculture and the unions working together.
So is this something that the state level Farm Bureau is
It's something that
thinking
we
of?
should probably explore. Again, I'm not an expert on this. I've just read here and there, and again, drive by various, not just in Champaign or on North Prospect, but various aspects of our community, and see these buildings all over. So I want to make sure it's not just a Champaign issue.
No.
There's buildings all over in various communities, and so, but something maybe we need to look stronger at it is, again, as a partnership, to continue to stress that this needs to be a priority.
Well, I think the emphasis of our conversation today is because the farmland, as you started out in our conversation explaining, that it is really a very valuable entity for our community, one of 3 spots in the world. So focusing on many creative ways of keeping it as farmland and compacting infill and development, which is what you're focusing
Right.
on, is not unnecessarily putting an emphasis just on Champaign County.
Right.
It's very important, and it's not just Champaign County that's so valuable. It is this Midwest
Right.
breadbasket.
It's sort of East Central Illinois expanded.
Exactly,
It really
exactly.
is. I mean, it takes in a good portion of this area, and then many states. But again, in general, in a broad terms, this is some of the best farmland in the world. Is right
It is,
here.
and you are right. It is happening in other communities.
Yes, it is.
Similar patterns of uncontained sprawl, which then we have to then contend with because you brought in the fact of the empty big
Right.
boxes that are sitting here and there
Right.
in this is in other communities
Right.
also that they have.
Well, and so again, infill redevelopment's one policy of ours that we look at.
Okay.
It should be a policy. There's really 2 other main ones, and is another concept of 1 house per 40 acres. Now, when I say that, you think of 40 acres, wow, 1 house, that's not much. Now, that's part of the current zoning rewrite that's occurring here for the county, and that is part of what, it's not necessarily 1 per 40, 1 house per 40. There are exemptions. If there's a current farmhouse on that, then there can be another house. Say a son wants to get involved in the farming operation. You could build another house on that. But what that does do some limiting of what you can do out in the country. It would really limit these rural subdivisions that are, again, 20, 30 miles north of town, 5 miles north of town, that don't have a sewer system, that, then they're adding cost to bus transportation for kids. Township government has to plow and often some of those roads through the subdivision, things like that. And I think the other policy that's there that the Farm Bureau has is limiting development on ground that has an LE score of 85 or more.
Let me stop you there.
Okay.
Why don't you help people understand what an LE score of 85
There's a
means?
score process based on the soil types and the soil characteristic that is done on soils in Champaign County.
Okay.
And basically, if it had a score of 85 or better, you would not be able to develop on that property. And that it does take out a major portion of the county, because again, our soil types are so good and have
So
such
85
quality.
is a very
Is
valuable.
a very good soil. In
Okay.
general, does not mean it has to be perfectly flat. There can be some gently rolling characteristics, and there's some very good soil types, and then there's good soil types, and it takes in a lot of those. But it really would limit where you could put a subdivision if it was able to build out in the rural area, or where you could put a house. And so those are sort of the policies that we sort of stand on, those 2, as well as compact and contiguous development. And so we think that those are reasonable, are going to help preserve farmland, but still allow for some private property rights issues, because again, it's a very fine line between private property rights and farmland preservation, and one that we try to walk. And sometimes individuals view us on either side of the issue, and so it's something we constantly battle within our own organization, of when have we crossed that line of private property rights and gone to the other side. And we want to try to stay as much as we can in the middle, but that's a difficult task.
This is a very difficult subject on farmland. Does the state level Farm Bureau then develop any kinds of model ordinances to help communities start thinking through what you have just listed as some of the policies that you you meaning the Farm Bureau, not
Right.
you personally, think are very important?
I'll give you a little bit of background first to explain our policy, and then I'll answer your specific question. Our policy is grassroots driven, meaning that policy starts on the county level. When I'm referring to state Illinois Farm Bureau policy, it's individuals, members who come up with an idea and say, hey, you know, this would be a good policy for the organization. And that can be on any subject as long as it pertains in general to agriculture. That individual suggests a policy to a county farm bureau such as Champaign County or any other county, and they take it and put it into wording and they send it through the process. The process is it goes through a resolutions committee that reviews these and says, you know, this is something that should be forwarded on. And so the next step, when I say forwarded on, is every county in the state of Illinois sends delegates to a county annual meeting. Delegates are based off membership, and Champaign County has the largest membership of voting or farmer members in the state, and so we send the most delegates to this. There's over 200 some delegates from across the state, and they're the one who vote on every policy. It's not the board of directors of the Illinois Farm Bureau or the president of the organization coming in and saying, well, this is our policy from the top down. We literally, our grassroots from the bottom up, set our policy. So when we talk about specifically land use policies, those are voted on by the people that come from every county in the state of Illinois. They have a laundry list of farmland preservation, private property rights type policies, and so they do have policies that we as a county farm bureau abide by because again, it's a consensus sets these policies, and so they do have a laundry list of policies. Everything that deals with land use evaluation scores to the rights of private property rights to extraterritorial jurisdictions of communities, and so and there's a lot more I'm not mentioning. So there is guiding principles from the state organization that we as counties can look at and work on with our local communities.
So based on those policies that have come up from the grassroots all the way up, then do you find yourself standing before the various city councils when some of the sprawl issues are before them for decision making?
And again, I've given you a lot of long answers, and this one won't be any different. Our efforts in general have focused on the county level and with the zoning rewrite or county ordinances, because it's in general that a rural subdivision goes to the county, not necessarily the city. However, in the last year or so, our land use committee, which we have a specific committee in Champaign County that focuses on nothing but land use issues.
And this is a committee within
the Champaign County Farm Bureau, and we have, you know, a variety of people on there. Generally, they're landowners, or they're all landowners that participate in this. And basically, here in the last year or so, we've focused on, you know, we should be visiting with Champaign, we should be visiting with Urbana, we should be visiting with Savoy, Mahomet. And we have invited representatives from those communities. We have visited with Urbana on when they finish their comprehensive plan, their update of that. And so one of the things I compliment and commend the leadership of Urbana and the city of Urbana for their quality of their comprehensive plan. One of the things that we really liked about theirs was they have control, they have city limits, that is where their city is, and then they have mile-and-a-half jurisdiction out from those city limits. Many communities across the state will say, well, here's our city limits, and here's our mile-and-a-half jurisdiction. And what that means is if you want, in that mile-and-a-half, you're not within city limits. So you're not necessarily governed by all the laws of the city, but if you want to add on to your house, you don't necessarily go to the county, even though you may be in the country. You go to the city and visit with them and get permits. In their mile-and-a-half jurisdiction, the city of Urbana planned for agriculture and farming. Many communities across the state looked at that and say, well, that's our jurisdiction, we're going to plan for development. And so I commend, and we as an organization commend to the city of Urbana for leaving agriculture in their jurisdiction area in their comprehensive plan. So we commend, like I said, the mayor, the leadership of this community for what they have done in planning for agriculture. And I think seeing the value of agriculture in their community and the value that it brings for open space and the value that it offers individuals is wonderful. And so, again, I can't say enough, we really appreciate what Urbana's done. The catch of it is, and not to say that they're not going to, is adhering to their comprehensive plan. Unique circumstances always come up, and we understand that, but we hope that they continue to go by their comprehensive plan. And so so that's what we've done here in the past year, is try to focus a little bit more on the city communities to know where they're going, what their plans are, which direction they think they're going to span, and also transportation, because we have to remember that that fits into the balance as well between rural and urban, is the transportation issues. Farmers need to be able to get their equipment to farm fields, and some of those, sometimes we may have to get on fairly main roads or roads close to the community. We need to get to the elevators. A great example of that is the Anderson's elevator, which sits on the other side of where we're at today in Champaign. Well, those roads over there are becoming more and more urban, but farmers need to drive their semis, their trucks to get to those, and sometimes we all know individuals can get impatient, they're in a hurry. And so it's important for us to know their road plans, because that's a key component of this as well, is not just their land use but also their road developments and what they're planning for.
That's a very good point, because that area is filling in more and more and becoming more and more urban.
Correct.
And this we're having to learn how to live together and design accordingly.
And again, that
right?
gets back to planning, designing for a balance between agriculture and urban. And Farm Bureau firmly believes there can be that balance with proper planning and design for that. And so that's our goal, a goal that probably won't be achieved this year, but maybe next year, maybe the following year, but something we're constantly working towards. And that's why we're trying to continue to build relationships with the communities as they expand, to make sure that they remember that agriculture is a key component of this area.
Yes, it's an economic development.
Absolutely, it is.
It clearly is. I don't know if you, your knowledge base is broad enough to answer this, but if we looked at some of the other states surrounding us here in the Midwest, is there a state you would point to as sort of ahead of us in the way they are working on this issue of farmland, good use, agriculture?
There are other states working on this. I couldn't necessarily pinpoint a state that's leaps and bounds ahead of us, but there are other states. The state of Ohio is working a great deal on various ordinances to do that. Then you go to the West Coast, you look at Oregon, which is a topic we've discussed, growth boundaries. Those are type of issues where they're planning for it. Each community's bringing different aspects to it, but there are other states that are planning for it as well as Illinois. So
it was sort of an unfair question to get that to you. When I was still working on my planning degree, I had a research project of writing a farmland preservation ordinance on the state level. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I really found interesting as I looked at some of the other states, that Iowa seemed to be quite ahead of us at that juncture. That doesn't mean today that might still be the case. We may be, catching up. But one of the key things that Iowa was doing that it took us in this state a very long time to get to is no-till.
Correct.
And the amount, why don't you talk about how much of the farmland surface we lose?
Right. Over the years, if you look back 50 years ago, farmers, and it was a standard practice for agriculture across the Midwest, was moldboard plowing. And basically their goal there was to take the stalks, the corn stalks, and turn those and put those completely under the ground. So all that you did when you drove by a field was see black dirt. And they prided themselves, many farmers did, that there was no corn stalks still sticking up, that they were completely turned in. And that offered value. It offered organic matter and things, and many people are familiar with that. over the years, we've realized that the wind picks up in the Midwest and water erosion occurs, and that may not be the best practice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so the soil and water conservation districts across the state, across the Midwest, started preaching the fact that, we need to look at no-till. And that was I wouldn't say a radical, but that was a change in philosophy.
Right.
And what no-till farming is basically a farmer goes out there and harvests the soybeans or the corn, and they don't till it, just as it implies, no-till, and that's the way the field stays all winter.
The roots help.
The roots are there, the stubble, the stalks that are left in the field stay there. That helps when the wind blows, helps control wind erosion, and when it rains, it also helps the soil from being washed away. And there is a great amount of no-till occurring across the Midwest, but here in Champaign County as well, and that has made great strides in soil loss and erosion, putting that soil into our streams and things like that. Great strides have been made. Not perfect. There's always room for improvement. There's always room for more of that. But there have been a lot of progress made on that of reducing our soil loss into that way.
If my memory is serving me correctly, the pictorial statistic that I read at that time was that every fall season after plowing, and they plowed under, that the loss of topsoil would fit into the Empire State Building.
And
So
that could be,
that
that
sort
could
of-
be. That's
that
quite a
brings it
visual.
home. That's a
Yes,
visual,
that's
isn't
quite
it?
a visual.
I know the state level Farm Bureau has a number of educational programs. Are those programs ever brought down to the various government entities within the state, or to increase the appreciation of some of these issues that you're talking about?
Well, the Illinois Farm Bureau signs on as co-sponsors to many types of projects and planning type projects, and brings in a variety of speakers at various conferences we have. So they do a lot. Champaign County is relatively unique in that we've started to put more of an emphasis on that, exactly what you're talking about. Last summer we planned what we called a land use summit. And what we did, we opened it up to city planners, county people from across the state, farmers, anybody that has anything to do with preservation, land use type issues. And so we were able to put on a day-long conference that focused on land use type issues, from techniques that cities and communities can use in planning efforts, such as comprehensive plans, transportation type plans, to what our policy is, to individuals that are perhaps viewed a little bit more outside the box. We brought in Lou Hopkins from some of his ideas are a little different, and so a little bit harder for some individuals to accept, but are legitimate ideas that need to be looked at. We also brought in individuals from various communities that have seen much more rapid development than we have, specifically from the collar counties,
Right.
and talked
Kane
a little
County.
about what they've done, what's worked, how individuals, and the importance of getting involved. And really, that's really a big thing, is individuals getting involved. Individuals need to be involved in the process of development. If they're concerned about it, need to be involved in that process, need to go to meetings, need to speak up for what they believe in. Too often, it's very easy to say, oh, it's cold out, or in a lot of cases, the Illini game's on tonight. Legitimate reasons many nights, trust me, but they need to get involved. They need to stay informed. They need to get involved in the process that many of these things go through. And so that's one way people can truly make a difference. And so that was a panel discussion of what people have done, how they've been involved, but also, again, other communities and what they've done and how they've planned and controlled development.
You've brought up again the program that you all sponsored last summer. That leads me into sort of pushing the envelope on this. You've mentioned Lou Hopkins'
Correct.
presentation, and then you alluded to growth boundaries in Oregon. These are probably two concepts that our audience don't know much about. So why don't you start with what Lou talked about? Lou is a colleague of mine in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning.
Well, you may have to help me a little bit. I'm not 100% an expert on this, of course, like Lou is, but basically out in the state of Oregon, and in some other states out there in the upper west there, they have implied and started growth boundaries. And what they've done is they've basically, cities and states have taken a community such as Portland. I think they've got urban growth boundaries, I think,
That's
out
correct.
there, Portland. They've basically looked at it and sort of drawn a circle around the community and said, or maybe not a perfect circle, but sort of a circle around some sort of shape around the city, and said, this is sort of our boundary for development. This is where, on this side of the community is where we want housing development. This side, sort of our urban growth or industrial growth. And this here, sort of office type growth. But this is sort of as far as we think we want to go in the future. And what we're going to do is, when a developer comes to us or a business, we're going to say, fine, we'd love to have you here, but here's your area to build in. We're not going to run services out past this for right now. You're going to have to be constrained a little bit in this. And so it has come with some success, it's my understanding. The boundaries, it's my understanding, have also been revisited after several
Yes,
years and expanded,
they have.
which, again, I think that gets back to the point of compact and contiguous development. And I think urban growth boundaries kind of goes along with that. So there's probably a lot more to it, and Patsy, maybe you can fill in a few gaps, but my perception is that's the basics of it.
You did a marvelous job of explaining urban growth boundaries, and there are some shortcomings to them, as you
Right.
alluded to.
It's not a perfect system, but it's something that's had some success. And
Yes,
so,
and Portland is a very livable city because it has enhanced the infill and the tightness
right.
of development, and then it has enhanced their outer ring beyond the
Correct.
boundary because it is open space and agriculture, and agriculture there is a lot of
Right.
wine and
And again, it gets back to the fact of compact and contiguous
Yes.
development, plan development, design development. And so those are all things that we as an organization, we as a state organization firmly believe in. And so we think that, again, that goes back to my original point that agriculture and urban areas can coexist in society and need to coexist, but those things need to be recognized as important.
And I think Lou presented another concept that some of the folks in the audience had a hard time probably accepting when he suggested that we relook at farming as clearly an economic development aspect. It's a business, and look at zoning more as a business aspect than just an agricultural zoning, and rethink things in a regional sense.
Lou definitely challenged us, and that is a wonderful thing to do. You continue to need to challenge people, but you're right, Patsy. Agriculture is a business these days, and that's one of the things that we need to change practically a mindset in some instances. Agriculture is a business. It's a way of life. Much as an individual owns a home or an individual owns a business, that's what farmers are. They're owning a small business, and that's the way agriculture in many cases needs to be viewed, as a small business. And then to go along with that are supporting businesses, processing end of it, whether that's an elevator or a fertilizer plant. Those individuals and those companies are supporting a small business. And so we need to be cognizant of that as we start to plan for development.
And one other sort of thinking outside the box solution to preserving this farmland, which I keep suggesting to people, is wind farms.
Wind farms are something that's really come on the scene in the last several years, but they're not new in the last several. These have been around for decades, centuries, most likely. I mean, we look at Holland, isn't it Holland, where you have the tulips? You think of tulips and windmills, but here in the United States, there's many areas that have wind farms off the East Coast and West. But in Illinois, it's a relatively new concept. I was, prior to coming to Champaign County, I was worked up in northern Illinois in the Princeton area. And if anybody is really a guru on wind farms, that was one of the first wind farms in the state of Illinois proposed. And so they went through some definite challenges with getting that approved. And eventually it was. But wind farms are looked at as a lot of people think, well, Jesus, as windy as it is, we should be able to put a wind farm any place in the state of Illinois, especially if you're, as a student, walking across campus. Or, of course, here in the wintertime.
On a cold, windy day.
On a cold, windy day and the way the snow blows. But there are a limited number, as of right now, the testing that's been done. There is relatively a limited number of places that economically it would be best to put a wind farm up. And there are, it's my understanding, some places in Champaign County where there would be some possibilities for some wind farms or wind towers. Matter of fact, the University of Illinois and the College of Aces, I believe that they're putting up 3, correct me if I'm wrong, up on the New South Farm. And so wind farms are a way for agriculture to diversify. Mm-hmm. It takes up, in essence, virtually very little land out of production. Right. The ones in northern Illinois that I worked with, they were going to take out, each tower was roughly half an acre or less. And that was including the road to connect them. So if there was 5 of them, they like to have those all connected. Right. So roughly half an acre, including the road. You can farm around them, and they're producing a renewable energy, which is gaining popularity. Of course, as we see many challenges with oil and fossil fuels, oil coming into the country, they're not making much more of that these days. It takes hundreds of years for that to be reproduced. We're looking for alternative fuel sources, and wind energy is a possibility. So how does that fit into development and things like that, and zoning? All very good questions. The Illinois Farm Bureau is working with, you asked earlier about some guiding principles. The Illinois Farm Bureau is working on some guiding principles for zoning for counties that have proposed wind sites, so that when one is proposed in McLean County, or I guess that's a good example because there is probably going to be one, or Champaign, a county farm bureau or some citizens can say, here is some basics that the zoning ordinance should consider regarding setbacks and things. You don't want your house right under one of those. Not that there's health problems or any problems, but if for some odd reason the tower fell, or, ice can build up on some of the blades. Right. There are a few concerns and a few issues, legitimate ones, that need to be addressed with zoning. And so, but these, again, there is potential for wind development, and something that does play a role then in housing development and businesses, because, again, there are some setbacks required with these towers. And so that can be viewed as a way of preserving farmland, and you and I have talked about that. The best way to save 40 acres, maybe the best way is to put a wind tower up on it. That's true. That could be. Again, as of right now, there is a relatively small number of areas you can put towers, but with more technology that's going into that sector and that industry, wind development, we're going to see, I think, a lot more areas eligible and economically beneficial to put those towers up. And again, primarily those are going to be in the rural areas on farmland. But again, it's a great way for agriculture to diversify their farming operation. And so it definitely has its benefits.
And we want to make sure that people understand there is income that would come to the farmer from the sale of that alternative energy, and that a community also gains income in the permitting process.
Correct.
For the turbine to be placed.
Right.
So there's a financial win-win to this.
The one I, again, am familiar with in northern Illinois in Bureau County, called Crescent Ridge, if I remember right, is what it's called, and is in production. I've seen it. It is in production. Those individual landowners signed I believe it was a 20-year lease. I won't reveal the number that they got each year, but I'm familiar with that number. They signed a 20-year lease, and then the county also had a permitting process per tower. And so it was in the 50 to 60 range tower, the project, and so they got a permit fee for each tower. It wasn't the whole project, and so there was an economic benefits to the county and to the community. There's also the fact of tourism that can be added to that, and I can't substantiate these numbers, but they were saying that there would be individuals who would want to, out of curiosity, drive by. And so if they drive out to these rural areas, maybe they drive out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, on the way back into town, they need gas. Or, well, it's almost supper time. maybe we should just spend the night here. And so, the restaurants, maybe a motel, a gas station benefited from it that was in the city that they had to get back to a main road for. So there are benefits to wind energy and wind towers. It's a matter of finding those locations in the state, in Champaign County perhaps, that are economically beneficial, and then finding a source for that energy. But more and more energy companies are looking what is referred to often as the green energy,
Right.
renewable energy. And so
Right.
this is a great thing for them to purchase. So it can have some definite benefits, no question about it.
It can, and besides Bureau County, let me mention Lee County also has a wind farm. So if you're ever curious to take a drive up to northern and sort of slightly western part of our state, that you can see what those would look like.
Basically, if you go up I-39,
Okay,
going north,
I-39 right there.
39, you can't miss them when you get
Yeah.
up to Lee County, DeKalb County area. There are some that cross over county lines, and again, I know that this was several months ago. I lost track of the status, but in McLean County, up towards the Gibson City area, that direction's looking at some and going through their zoning process. Western Illinois is looking at some, far western Illinois is looking at some projects as well. So it's something, again, that I can't stress enough. It can be a win situation for...
Win, 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 double entendre.
Yes, that's right. That's correct. So it can be some good projects. So,
Well, my last question to you is, if you were king of the Farm Bureau, what policies would you like to see put in place?
well, I don't know that as I mentioned earlier, I guess, continue to stress to communities in the county for compact and contiguous development. The 1 per 40 concept, which I talked about earlier, and I think the LE, or the land evaluation score of 85 or more, but I guess setting aside policy is something I'd like to see, and some people laugh when they talk about this, but I think it's a legitimate question is in 50 years, I'd still like to see farmland in Champaign County. Now, again, looking out the window today, you're like, oh, no, not a problem. However, as we see more and more sections of farmland each year developed, or more roads put in to consume that land, I think that could be a legitimate question and a legitimate stance to take, that in 50 years, in 20 years, we want to see farmland in Champaign County. You look at what some of the suburban counties to Cook County have, and there's really not that much left. And my personal concern is that, I don't want Champaign County to be lumped in with some of those counties, a DeKalb County, a Kendall County, a Lake County, where there's not much farmland left up there. I'd like to see farmland in Champaign County in 50 years.
So the Farm Bureau will be working with the county and
We
Champaign and Urbana
We
and
think it's
Savoy.
crucial. We think it's very
Good.
much crucial to work with these communities, the 3 you mentioned, Mahomet, Rantoul, St. Joe, and all the communities, to make sure that they see farmland as an asset from a standpoint of attracting individuals to their communities, and not just an asset of, well, that's something we can develop on, and so we want as much as we can of it. I mean, obviously, again, you probably are not going to stop development, but you can plan for it, and you can do certain things to make it look better than what some communities throughout the state have, and plan for agriculture in the future.
Brad, I appreciate very much you coming and having the conversation with me today. And I'm sure now that you better understand why it is so important to preserve our farmland and keep it into agriculture within our county. Again, I promise to re-mention about your opportunity to learn more about planning at the Annual Planning Institute that is sponsored by the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the university. And this seems like a very key time to do this because of the Big Small All visioning project we're right in the middle of the process of that within the county. And let me turn over the card here so you can have an idea of the highlighted speakers, Michael Piatuk and Gary Hack. They will be giving the evening talks. And if you'd like to look at the detailed program for the Institute, just go to www.uken.edu dot urban, URBAN, dot UIUC dot edu/CE. I hope to see you at the Institute, and thank you for watching today.